I will never forget the moment that millionaire looked at me with pure contempt, as if I were nothing more than an obstacle in his path. It wasn't just a laugh, it was a sentence, a silent accusation that I was worth nothing, that I didn't deserve respect, that I was beneath him. That moment burned into my skin like fire, even though I stood completely still on the outside. It was the kind of humiliation you don't forget, not even when life moves on, because it comes back to you in your thoughts. When you close your eyes, when you take a deep breath, when you remember the person you were that day. I was standing right there in front of him, trying to solve something simple, something anyone with a shred of decency would treat with respect. But he didn't see me as a human being. He didn't see my story, my years of struggle, my dignity. All he saw was a woman who, to him, looked insignificant, a woman he believed he could shrink without consequence. But life has a strange way of returning to us what others once tried to take. And in that moment, while I held my own voice back to keep from breaking, I felt something inside me crack, but I also felt something else being born. Because the truth is, that encounter didn't start there. His arrogance was just the latest chapter in a long book of wounds life had already carved into me. And maybe that's why it hurt so deeply. Because when someone humiliates you, it isn't only about what they say. It's about everything you've lived, everything you've carried, everything you fought to overcome. His laugh hit my soul like it wanted to wake up every old pain, every time I had to swallow my tears, every moment I had to be strong when no one knew how tired I really was. But there's one thing he never imagined. Women like me, women like us, don't break easily. We are built from scars that turned into armor, from falls that taught our spine to stand straight, from humiliations that awakened our strength. And in that exact second, when he mocked me, what he was really doing was lighting the fuse of my turning point. He thought he was adding to my pain, but in truth, he was pushing my destiny out of the shadows. I kept looking at him, wondering how someone who had so much could be so small. And the strangest part was that, while he laughed, while he made sure everyone saw how important he felt, I realized he had no idea who I was, no idea of the life I had lived, no idea of the strength I carried inside me, waiting for the right moment to rise. He thought he was dealing with a defeated woman, a tired woman, a weak woman. But when you've lost so much, when you've been ignored so many times, when you've had to rebuild yourself from nothing with only you and God to lean on, a laugh doesn't destroy you, it wakes you up. And before I go on with this story, before I tell you what truly happened after that humiliation, I want you to do something for me. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Write your city, your state, your country. That matters, because this story isn't just mine. This story belongs to every person who has ever been underestimated, judged by their appearance, humiliated by someone who thought they were better. It belongs to every woman who learned to turn pain into strength. It belongs to every human being who has heard an unjust laugh and promised themselves that one day no one would ever dare laugh at their dignity again. You on the other side of the screen, listening. To these words, maybe you've lived something similar. Maybe someone already tried to shrink you. Maybe they doubted your abilities, mocked your faith, ridiculed your simplicity, ignored your worth. Maybe you carry memories of a humiliation that changed your path. And if it did, then you know exactly what I felt in that moment. It's not just shame. It's not just anger. It's a mixture of powerlessness and a deep desire to prove that life doesn't end there, that what happened doesn't define who you are. When he laughed, I could have turned my back. I could have responded. I could have cried, but I didn't do any of that. Because sometimes the most powerful answer you can give the world is not reacting. It's letting silence speak for you. It's letting time reveal what humiliation tried to hide. I stood there, listening to that laugh echo around me, knowing that in that exact moment something was being written inside me, something big, something he would never imagine. Today, when I look back, I understand. Life needed that moment. It needed that pain. It needed that shock. Sometimes destiny begins to move exactly when someone tries to hurt you. Sometimes the path opens when someone tries to close it. I didn't know it yet, but that humiliation would take me to a place he never imagined he would see me. A place where I wouldn't need to raise my voice to show who I was. A place where his laugh would finally lose its power. And that's where the real story begins. Because after that day, nothing was ever the same. What I discovered soon after changed everything. And that's what I need to tell you now. I didn't end up there that day by accident. Life had shaped me in ways he would never understand. Before that humiliation, I was a woman who lived quietly, carrying stories in my chest no one ever asked about, pains no one ever noticed, and a strength almost no one recognized. My life was never easy, and maybe that's exactly why his arrogance didn't destroy me. It only touched an old scar, a mark left by years of facing battles the world never even knew existed. For a long time, I learned how to survive with little. I grew up understanding that life doesn't always give you what you deserve, but it always tests you to see what you're made of. I knew the weight of responsibility from a young age. I worked early, took care of everything and everyone, always trying to keep my head up, even when the world seemed determined to push me down. My routine was heavy, built on sacrifice, sleepless nights, and the constant feeling that, to some people, I would never be enough. Still, I kept going, because some women learn too early that quitting isn't an option, that when life crushes you, you take a deep breath and rebuild yourself in silence. And that silence was part of me, a silence that held the pain of my losses, the disappointments I endured, the people I helped even when I was exhausted, and who, in the end, turned their backs when I needed them. Silence of a mother, a daughter, a woman who learned to swallow her tears so she wouldn't worry anyone. Silence of someone who'd been judged for the clothes she wore, the color of her skin, the way she walked, the little she had in her pocket, but the abundance she carried in her heart. Silence of someone who knew injustice up close, but never stopped believing in a greater justice, one that never fails, even when it takes its time. I know many people listening now understand exactly what I mean. This life of quiet struggle, hidden strength, daily courage. If you've ever had to be stronger than you wanted to be, write the word endurance in the comments. I want to see how many people know what it feels like to walk with a heavy heart, but still move forward, step by step, without losing their dignity. The truth is, no one is born strong. Strength is built along the way. In my case, it was shaped by rejection, lack of opportunity, doors that closed without explanation. I was the kind of woman the world didn't see because it was always others receiving the credit, the recognition, the space. I did so much, yet it felt like no one noticed. And still, I kept going, because when you have faith, you understand that your value doesn't depend on anyone's eyes. It exists even when no one sees it. But even the strongest woman has her story of pain. I carried losses that still burned, memories that never fully faded. I lost people I loved, found myself alone when I most needed support, felt the emptiness of trusting those who only used me, tasted the bitterness of betrayal from someone I never imagined would hurt me. I knew what it was like to build a future with my own hands and watch that future crumble before my eyes. I knew what it was like to gather the pieces of my soul and keep walking even when everything felt impossible. And it was that quiet journey that transformed me. I wasn't perfect, but I was strong. I wasn't wealthy, but I had dignity. I wasn't influential, but I was resilient. I didn't have everything, but I had something many people never develop, the ability to start over as many times as necessary. And that changed the way I absorbed that millionaire's humiliation. He thought he was dealing with someone fragile, but he had no idea I had already survived things far harsher than the disdain of a man full of himself. I didn't need to prove anything to him. I needed to prove to myself that his laughter would not change who I was, because long before that night, long before his arrogance, long before that wound, I had already learned that a person's worth isn't measured by how much money they have, what position they hold, or what title they carry. A person's worth is revealed in how they treat those who have nothing to offer them in return. And he failed miserably at that. He showed exactly what lived inside him, and it wasn't greatness, it wasn't power, it wasn't superiority, it was emptiness. But even so, that day, I felt small, maybe because the wound he touched was already there. It wasn't just about what he said or did. It was about everything I had lived, everything I had swallowed, all the times I had felt invisible. And that's why the humiliation cut so deep. It awakened old memories, opened doors to hurts I thought I had left behind, hurts still hiding in a quiet corner of my heart. I remember that during that time, I was always trying to balance everything: work, bills, responsibilities, expectations. My body tired, my mind heavy, my faith steady but tested. I went through my days feeling like I was holding the world in my hands, trying to keep my face calm so I wouldn't worry anyone. Women like us don't have room for weakness, and maybe that's why life demands so much from us, because it knows we can carry it, even when we think we can't. When he humiliated me, I didn't fall apart right there, but something trembled inside me. Something awakened, something called me out of that exhausted version of myself. It was as if that moment had opened a door I had never dared to walk through. A door showing me I could be so much more than people believed, so much more than they expected, so much more than I myself imagined. And before I go on, I want to ask you to write the words "I deserve" in the comments. Because all of us deserve respect, deserve dignity, deserve to be seen, deserve to be heard. I deserve it, you deserve it. Every person who has carried the weight of the world on their back and was still underestimated by someone who never understood the depth of our story deserves it. My quiet story wasn't a story of failure. It was a story of construction. It was the fertile ground where I would still grow. And it was because of that foundation that his humiliation didn't destroy me. It only lit the path I still needed to walk, a path he never imagined I'd be capable of taking. And right after I recognized everything I carried inside me, all the strength life had given me, something began to change. Not all at once, not in a clear way, but quietly, the way everything in my life always happened. And it's this first sign of change that I need to tell you about now, because that's when destiny started moving in ways I could never have predicted. When I finally began to see my own strength, I also started seeing him differently. Because that millionaire's behavior, the way he treated me, the way he laughed at my pain, came from a place far deeper than the superficial arrogance stamped on his face. He had money, he had possessions, he had access to things I could only dream of at that time in my life. But he lacked something you can't buy, you can't learn, you can't fake: character. And the more I remembered the way he humiliated me, the clearer it became that his laugh didn't start the day he met me. It was born from a lifetime of belittling anyone he considered beneath him. The truth is, long before that day, everyone in town knew he was the kind of man who confused wealth with worth. He grew up around luxury, surrounded by people who said yes to everything he wanted, accustomed to doors opening, opportunities waiting, and paths laid out before him. He was the type who never had to fight for anything. And maybe that's why he never learned to respect those who fight every single day. He had a reputation for being brilliant in business, fast at making money, sharp in strategy. But he also carried a quiet reputation few dared to say out loud. He built his empire by stepping on people. His employees knew it. His business partners knew it. Even his family, though they tried to hide it, knew it. He believed power gave him permission to look down on everyone. And that mindset showed in his eyes, always scanning people to measure their usefulness to him, not their humanity, their usefulness. If you didn't serve a purpose, didn't benefit his plans, didn't add anything to his life, you were dismissed, invisible, irrelevant. I had heard stories about him long before the humiliating encounter. Stories of people treated like trash, promises broken, employees fired without reason, families harmed by decisions made with cold calculation. He built wealth, but destroyed relationships, accumulated money, but lost respect. And still, many admired him, because we live in a world that too often confuses success with character. People look at the shine of an expensive watch and think it means greatness, when in reality, it often means emptiness. I didn't know all these details when he laughed at me, but once I began to observe him more closely, everything started to make sense. Every time he humiliated someone, every time he disrespected, every time he diminished a person, he was repeating a pattern shaped by a lifetime, a pattern fed by the belief that he would never face consequences. People like him believe life will always bend in their favor. They believe money is a shield, power is a fortress, status is protection. He lived convinced that nothing could touch him, that everything was within reach, that everyone around him existed to serve, praise, and reinforce the superiority he clung to at any cost. But there was something he never understood. Character can't be hidden. He thought he could mask his essence with luxury, expensive clothes, important events, well-rehearsed speeches, thought he could hide behind his family name, his influence, his connections. But whatever lives inside a person always finds a way to show itself. The eyes reveal it, the gestures reveal it, the way they treat others reveals it. And that day, when he laughed in my face, he wasn't laughing at me. He was showing the world exactly who he really was. His arrogance had deep roots. People said he grew up hearing from his father that in life, either you step on others or you get stepped on. He learned early that showing emotion was weakness, that humility was for losers, that apologizing meant inferiority, and he absorbed all of that as truth. On the outside, he looked confident. On the inside, he was just an insecure man trying every day to prove he was powerful because he was terrified of facing his own emptiness. I started to think, more than once, that his laugh wasn't even about me. It was about himself, about his desperate need to reaffirm a superiority he didn't truly believe in. When someone needs to humiliate others to feel good, that tells you everything about the emotional poverty they carry. And he carried a lot. His bank account was full, but his heart was bankrupt. And even though no one told him this to his face, everyone knew. Maybe that's why so many feared him. He used fear as a tool. He didn't want respect. He wanted submission. And he achieved that with the same coldness he used to walk over the lives of those who couldn't defend themselves. And here's the irony. Life gives warnings, always. He had already lost friends, lost deals, lost important opportunities because of his harshness, his cruelty, his ingratitude. But he never noticed, never stopped to reflect. He saw consequences as accidents or betrayals, because in his mind, the problem was never in how he treated people. It was always someone else's fault, always some circumstance, never him. And all of that only made him worse. Each loss fed more resentment, more coldness, more arrogance. He built higher and higher walls so no one would notice that behind the image of success stood a broken man. Broken not by hardship, but by his own choices. Broken by his inability to feel empathy. Broken by a lack of humanity. Broken by boundless vanity. As I learned all this, I realized something I would carry forever. The humiliation he inflicted on me had nothing to do with me. It had everything to do with him, with the life he lived, with his twisted way of seeing the world, with his need to feel big by making others feel small. It was the reflection of a man who had everything except character. And understanding that brought a strange feeling, not pity, not anger, clarity. Because when you understand the root of someone's cruelty, it loses much of its power over you. And before I continue, if you've ever known someone like that, someone who had everything they needed to be great but chose to be small, write in the comments, "The mask falls." That truth has echoed through generations. The mask always falls. It may take time, it may seem like it will never happen, but one day, sooner or later, what someone tries to hide is revealed. And life, in its quiet wisdom, always finds a way to balance the scales. I didn't know it yet, but I was about to watch the scales shift. I was about to witness the moment when that man, so full of himself, so used to controlling everything, would begin to face something he had no power over. And it was exactly when I noticed the first crack in his perfect life that something inside me truly began to change. From that moment forward, I started seeing destiny move quietly but precisely, preparing the ground for something he would never see coming. The first crack in his perfect life appeared on that very night, the night everything revealed itself with a clarity that hit me like a blow. I remember every detail, not because I want to relive it, but because the pain marked me in a way I could never forget. It was late afternoon when I arrived at the place where it all happened. An elegant space lit with warm golden lights, full of people moving around as if the world belonged to them. It was the kind of environment that didn't match my simplicity, but I wasn't there to impress anyone. I was there because I needed to solve something important, something that had been keeping me awake for days. And he, with all the power he believed he had, was the only person who could help me at that moment. I had rehearsed in my mind what I needed to say, trying to stay calm, trying not to show my anxiety. When I walked in, I felt the weight of every stare slicing through me, judging. My simple clothes, my quiet steps, my presence. But none of that shook me, because I was focused. I walked toward the table where he sat, surrounded by people laughing loudly, people so desperate to get his attention it seemed like their lives depended on it. He sat at the center, as if he were the sun and everyone else were planets orbiting around his imaginary greatness. I approached him with humility and respect, the way I'd been raised. I had no intention of disrupting his moment. I only needed a few minutes of his time. When he noticed me, he looked at me as if he were staring at something inconvenient, something out of place. He motioned with his hand in that dismissive gesture people use when they want to silence someone without even hearing them out. But I took a breath and stayed where I was. I knew I had to insist, because the situation I was facing couldn't wait. So with calm firmness, I called him by name. That's when everything began. He lifted his head slowly, as if doing the world a favor. The people at the table went silent, curious to see who dared interrupt their private circle. My heart raced, but I kept my posture steady. I explained in simple, direct words why I needed to speak with him, something any decent human being would have at least listened to with a little humanity. But he didn't even listen. He heard just enough to despise me. He raised one eyebrow, leaned back in his chair, and with a crooked smile said the sentence that changed my life. "Do you really think someone like me has time for someone like you?" The words dropped like stones, and before I could even react, he laughed. A loud, mocking laugh dripping with poison. A laugh that wasn't responding to what I said. It was aimed at me, at who I was, at what he believed I represented. It was a perfect attempt to shrink me down to nothing in front of everyone. The whole table laughed with him, not because they genuinely found it funny, but because they wanted to please him. They wanted to take part in his cruelty, in his arrogance. And right then, I understood something brutal. Some people don't laugh out of humor. They laugh out of cowardice. They laugh because they're too afraid to stand on the right side and risk upsetting someone powerful. They laugh because they don't have the courage to be fair. But I didn't laugh. I couldn't. I just felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. The impact of those words hit me like ice down my spine. My face burned, as if every person was weighing my entire life, my mistakes, my journey. Humiliation isn't just a feeling. It's a wound that opens without warning, and in that moment, mine opened wide. The worst part wasn't what he said. It was how he said it. The cruelty in his eyes, the certainty that he had every right to treat me that way, the pleasure he took in belittling someone just to feed his ego. He didn't speak to me like a human being. He spoke as if he were addressing something disposable. For a moment, my voice disappeared. My throat tightened, as if the very air had abandoned me. I wanted to respond, to defend myself, to tell him he had no idea who I was or the strength I carried. But in that second, my voice was taken from me. Not because I had nothing to say, but because the humiliation was so deep, it stole the words right out of me. I stood there, unmoving, even though inside something was shattering into 1,000 pieces. Silence filled me. Not the silence born from peace, but the silence born from pain. The silence that makes you look inward and ask why some people feel entitled to crush another person's dignity. To this day, when I close my eyes, I can still hear that laugh. It echoes like a reminder of human cruelty, a sound that becomes a scar. And all of this happened in just a few seconds, seconds that felt endless. I looked around and no one defended me. No one said anything. No one questioned him. Everyone simply accepted his disrespect as if it were normal. And maybe to them, it was, because he lived surrounded by people who had grown used to his cruelty, people who no longer reacted, people who had already given up expecting humanity from him. But I wasn't one of those people. I didn't accept that kind of disrespect. Yet in that moment, there was nothing I could do except take a deep breath and hold back my tears. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my pain. I wouldn't let him know how deeply he hurt me. The only thing I managed to do was turn around and walk out with my head held high, even though my heart was collapsing inside me. As I stepped outside, I felt a mixture of shame, anger, disappointment, and disbelief. It was as if he had stolen my voice without laying a hand on me, and that hurt more than any insult, because when someone steals your voice, they steal your presence, your strength, your autonomy. They steal the image you have of yourself, and that night, he tried to do exactly that, steal who I was. But I learned something important in that instant. When someone tries to take from you something that is yours by right, like respect and dignity, life keeps the record, life sees, life remembers, and sooner or later, it returns everything. Not in the way we imagine, not at the time we want, but it returns. And before I continue, if you've ever experienced something like this, write the word dignity in the comments. Because dignity is our root, our invisible shield, the thing that keeps us standing even when someone tries to crush our soul. That night, as I walked alone down the street, a cold wind hit my face. My body trembled, not because of the weather, but because of what I had just lived. It felt like the world was reminding me that some scars are necessary to open new paths. I didn't know it yet, but that humiliation would be the last time anyone would make me feel small. And destiny, quiet as always, was already preparing the next step, the moment when everything would begin to change, even if I couldn't see it yet. When I left that place, the air outside felt heavier. The street was silent, but inside me, everything screamed. What I felt wasn't just sadness. It was something deeper, hotter, more alive. Something moved inside me as if it had been asleep for years and was suddenly awakened. It was as if that humiliation had pushed my soul out of a numb state. A pain intense but strangely necessary, burning through me, turning insecurity into strength, shame into momentum, weakness into determination. I walked slowly, trying to understand what was happening to me. The sound of his laughter still echoed, but it no longer held the same power it did minutes earlier. The more I thought about that night, the more I realized the pain had changed color. What had been an open wound now flickered like a flame. A small flame, but a living one. He thought he silenced me, thought he broke me, thought his arrogance had defeated me. But in truth, all of it ignited something inside me I didn't even know existed. Because there's a moment in every woman's life, every woman who's ever been humiliated, when pain stops being the enemy and becomes fuel. And that night, without knowing it, he gave me the fuel I needed to transform my story. I got home exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. My body trembled, not from sadness, but from revelation. My heart beat differently, as if trying to grab my attention, whispering, "Enough, it's your turn now." I sat on the edge of my bed, took a deep breath, and realized I was experiencing a kind of awakening I had never felt before. For years, I accepted crumbs of respect. For years, I got used to being treated as if I were always less. For years, I carried the quiet belief that the world had no place for me. And in a way, without noticing, I allowed that belief to keep me small. But that laugh shattered everything. It broke the last piece of the wall that had kept me stuck. Sometimes the most unexpected pain is the key that opens what has been locked inside you for a lifetime. And that night, staring at the dark ceiling, I felt a courage rising that didn't match the old version of me. It was as if God himself were calling me to stand up, as if he whispered, "You see? Now you know what you must do." And I did know. I knew I could no longer live the way I had before. I knew that humiliation couldn't remain only pain. It needed to become direction. It needed to become purpose. It needed to become movement. He laughed at me, but he had no idea of the woman I was about to become. And that's why I say to you, listening now, if anyone has ever made you doubt your worth, write, "I awakened" in the comments. Because awakening is exactly that, realizing you can no longer accept what doesn't honor who you are. Pain is a harsh teacher, but when it arrives, it brings messages with it. That night, it taught me I could no longer accept being treated as invisible. It taught me that the pain didn't come to destroy me, but to lift me. It taught me that his humiliation wasn't about my value, but about the emptiness he carried. And I understood I needed to turn all of it into action. Not impulsive, angry, immediate action, but silent, steady, consistent action. The kind of action only someone who knows the weight of life can put into practice. I got up from the bed with a feeling I had never experienced before. It felt as if my own legs understood something my soul was just beginning to learn. I opened the window, felt the early morning, wind on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel insecurity. I didn't feel fragile. I felt present. I felt strong. I felt that night had marked the beginning of something new, even if I didn't yet know what it was. But one thing I knew, I would never be the same again. In that moment, I remembered every time I had placed myself last, every time I believed I didn't deserve anything more than the bare minimum, every time life tried to show me my worth, and I wasn't ready to hear it, but now I was. That laugh was the final period of an old version of me, and the first paragraph of the new one. As the night moved toward dawn, I started making plans. Nothing grand, nothing immediate, just small steps, but real ones. Steps that would pull me out of silence. Steps that would take me to a place where dignity wasn't a daily battle, but a natural right. I knew the journey would be long, because for women like me, nothing comes easy. But I also knew I had survived things far greater than a millionaire's arrogance. And if I had made it through everything up to that point, I could certainly handle the work of rebuilding myself. From that night forward, I began observing life through a different lens. Every detail seemed meaningful. Every person looked like a sign. Every challenge felt like a piece fitting into the path I needed to walk. It was as if the entire universe was telling me it was time to take my place, and I decided I would listen. I decided I would honor every tear I had shed, every pain I had overcome, every injustice I had swallowed. I decided his humiliation wouldn't be the reason for my downfall, but the beginning of my rise. And something curious began to happen. The stronger I became on the inside, the more clearly I saw his flaws. His arrogant laugh no longer sounded powerful. His presence no longer seemed imposing. The man who once intimidated me started shrinking before my eyes, not because he had changed, but because I had. When you awaken, nothing and no one stays the same size. The pain that once crushed you becomes something you can hold in the palm of your hand. I also started to realize that moment wasn't just about me. It was about every woman who has ever been silenced. Every woman who swallowed humiliation to keep the peace. Every woman who carries too much strength to be treated with so little. I began to feel that somehow my transformation was also a path for others to see themselves in my story. And if you're still here, listening to every detail, that alone proves this journey isn't just mine. So write the word transformation in the comments, so I know you're walking with me. As the days passed, I felt my posture change, my breathing change, my way of speaking change, my vision of the future change. The humiliation became something distant, not because it stopped hurting, but because it found a new purpose. It became the force pushing me out of the place where I had been stuck for years. I understood it was time to take steps I had never had the courage to take. Time to reach for things I once believed were out of my reach. Time to finally believe what God had always known about me, even when I doubted it myself. And then, during one of those quiet days of awakening, something unexpected happened. Something that connected the pain I had lived with the path I was about to walk. Something I never could have imagined on that humiliating night, but that began unfolding before me as if destiny were preparing the next chapter of my story in ways I couldn't yet fully understand. The awakening was just the first step. What came after was the quietest and yet the most powerful part of my entire journey. When that flame lit inside me, I realized it wasn't enough just to feel something. I had to act, and not act in any reckless or rushed way, but with strategy, discipline, focus, and faith. I knew that if I truly wanted to turn that pain into something greater, I needed to build a new version of myself, brick by brick, slowly but without stopping. And that is exactly what I did. In the beginning, everything felt strange. I wasn't used to putting my needs first. I had always been the type who takes care of everyone else before taking care of herself, who solves everyone's problems while postponing her own dreams. But something inside me said that later was over. Now it was my turn to grow, to learn, to chase everything I had dreamed in silence. My turn to claim a space the world never offered me, but that I knew deep down belonged to me. I started with the foundation. Knowledge. I understood that to leave the place I was in, I needed to study. I needed to understand the things I once believed were too far from my reach. I spent hours watching classes, reading books, researching topics I had always thought weren't for someone like me. And the more I learned, the clearer it became that real power doesn't come from money. It comes from wisdom. Wisdom opens doors wealth cannot open. Wisdom protects, strengthens, illuminates paths. And that was the light I needed. I woke up early, before the sun, and studied in silence with the discipline of someone who knows her life depends on that effort. I took notes, reviewed everything, learned a little more each day, and whenever exhaustion hit, I remembered his laugh, not to feel pain, but to remember why I started. And that gave me strength, a steady, quiet strength only those who have suffered in silence truly understand. Alongside studying, I began working differently. Before, I worked just to survive. Now, I worked to build. I no longer accepted just anything. I chose carefully, observed everything, looked for environments where I could grow. And when I didn't find them, I created my own paths. It wasn't easy. Many times I wanted to give up. Many times I felt like I was walking against the wind. But the desire to change my life was stronger than the fear of failing. And faith never left me. It was my foundation. With every new step, I surrendered my path to God and asked Him for strength. And it seemed that the more I advanced, the more He placed signs along the way, small confirmations that I was heading in the right direction. Sometimes it was a conversation, sometimes an unexpected opportunity, sometimes just a quiet feeling of peace in the middle of the effort. But every sign kept me grounded. What amazed me most was that the more I grew, the more I felt life shaping me for something big. I still didn't know what it was, but I felt it was something beyond my own story, something being prepared long before I even realized it. I began taking better care of myself, my mind, my body, my spirit. I distanced myself from people who drained me, from places that shrank me, from habits that kept me stuck. And that internal cleansing was freeing, a quiet kind of freedom, but transformative. I also learned to grow quietly. I didn't talk about my plans. I didn't share my goals. I didn't announce my victories. Even though part of me wanted to tell someone everything, I knew each step needed to be taken in silence, because silence protects, silence strengthens, silence keeps envy, negativity, and malice from finding cracks in what's still being built. And so, in silence, I evolved. I used every free minute to learn something new. And when I wasn't studying, I was working on myself, rewriting old beliefs, healing wounds I didn't know were still there, strengthening every part of the woman I was becoming. And every internal shift reflected outward. My eyes changed, my posture changed, my voice changed. The world around me started responding differently. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged to myself. I also started seeing opportunities in places where before I only saw closed doors. Because when the mind changes, the world changes. A small chance here, another there. People who never noticed me before now wanted to hear me. Invitations that never came suddenly appeared. Offers came from places I never imagined. And even then, I moved with calm, because I knew it was only the beginning. I was in a hurry to change, but not in a hurry to skip steps. True ascension doesn't happen all at once. It happens step by step, brick by brick, building upon building. Each day, I thought less about the humiliation I lived and more about the future I was building. But whenever the memory of that man came to mind, it didn't hurt me anymore. It strengthened me. His laugh, which once tried to destroy me, now reminded me I would never again allow anyone to treat me that way. Never again let anyone take my voice, my dignity, my place. He showed me his darkness, and I answered by lighting my own path. As I grew, I began noticing something even more surprising. People started coming to me for advice, for help, for direction, and that touched me deeply, because for so long I believed no one saw me. But now the world was recognizing what I had discovered inside. The woman once ignored was becoming a reference, and that alone was a quiet but unforgettable turning point. If you're listening and have ever lived a moment like this, where pain ignites your courage, write the word ascension in the comments. Because ascension isn't just rising socially. Ascension is rising above what they tried to do to you, rising above the words that hurt you, rising above humiliation, injustice, and contempt. It is discovering that you always had wings even when the world tried to keep you on the ground. And it was in that period of silent growth that an unexpected opportunity crossed my path, something that seemed small at first, almost insignificant, but later became the step that would change my destiny entirely. Something that, without me knowing, would bring my journey closer to his in a way I never could have imagined. It was as if destiny were making its moves with patience, placing each piece carefully, preparing the moment when our stories would cross again, not like before, but in a completely different way. The opportunity that seemed small at first began growing in a way I never expected. One job here, another there, a partnership that opened up naturally, and before I realized it, I was already occupying a space that once felt too far away for someone like me. Every step I took seemed to bring me closer to a new horizon, as if life were quietly arranging everything while I simply followed its movement. I kept studying, working, improving myself, and without noticing, my presence started to be recognized. People began seeking me out, companies started inviting me, doors began to open on their own. And it was in this period of quiet ascension that something happened, something that, to this day, reminds me of the way life teaches. I was in the middle of an ordinary day, working, focused on what I needed to do, when I received an unexpected message. The name that appeared on the screen of my phone made my heart stop for a second. It was him, the millionaire, the same man who once laughed in my face as if I were invisible, the same man who used arrogance as a weapon, as a shield, as an identity. I blinked several times, thinking it had to be a coincidence, but it wasn't. It was truly him. And something inside me shifted. It wasn't pain, it wasn't anger, it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Life was showing me that things had changed, that I was no longer the quiet woman he had humiliated that night. I was someone else now, and this time, he was coming to me. I opened the message carefully. He said he needed to speak with me urgently. The words were formal, almost dry, but carried something I had never seen in him: humility, or at least something close to it. In that moment, I understood something serious had happened. Men like him don't seek help lightly. Men like him only reach out when the ground beneath them begins to shake. And even then, I didn't reply right. Away. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes for a moment, and let my silent soul guide me. The same soul he once tried to crush. I decided to call. And when he answered, his voice wasn't the voice I remembered. There was weight in it, exhaustion, a kind of break. He wasn't the arrogant millionaire I once knew. He was a man cornered by his own choices. He hesitated as he spoke, almost embarrassed to begin, like he was carefully choosing each word so he wouldn't reveal how fragile he felt, until he finally told me why he had reached out. He was facing a serious problem, something that threatened not only his business, but his reputation, his name, his stability, and he needed someone with my experience, my ability, my insight. He wanted my services. He wanted my help. He needed me. At first, I felt something bitter rise in my chest, not out of revenge, but from memory. I remembered the laugh, the cruel words, the humiliation in front of everyone. I remembered the pain of that day. But at the same time, I wasn't that woman anymore. He hadn't found the same person he mocked. He found someone transformed by pain, strengthened by silence, shaped by faith, guided by purpose. And maybe that's why, while listening to him, I didn't feel the urge to belittle him. I felt clarity, the clarity of seeing life returning everything in its own time. Still, I let him speak. He explained himself in a way he had never done with anyone. I tried to imagine the scene. This proud man, used to commanding, used to being served, used to standing at the top, now forced to seek help from the very person he once humiliated. Life has these ironies that don't require revenge. They are justice by themselves. He took a deep breath and before finishing, said something I never expected to hear. I've heard a lot about you. They said you're the only one who can help me. The only one. Life had turned so far that, in the end, it brought him right to where he needed to be. Standing on the path life placed me on. I remained silent for a moment. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to feel the moment fully. He didn't know it, but that silence was life responding through me. When I finally spoke, my voice came out steady, calm, centered. I told him I needed more details before making any decisions. He agreed immediately, almost anxiously. We scheduled a meeting for the next day. When I hung up, I sat down slowly. I looked at my hands as if I were seeing them for the first time. Hands that had worked so hard, hands that had held so much pain, were now the same hands he needed. And something inside me lit up. It wasn't pride. It was recognition. It was as if life were saying, now you understand why you had to go through what you went through. Everything began fitting together almost perfectly, as if that moment was the beginning of a new stage, a stage I never would have reached if I hadn't awakened on that humiliating night. The next day, I arrived at the meeting place. It was a luxurious office, but empty of energy. He was sitting at the table, his face tired, his expression tense. When he saw me walk in, he stood up immediately, not with authority but with respect, a quiet, uncertain, almost apologetic respect. It was strange seeing him like that, so different from the man who made me feel small. He greeted me with a reserved gesture and asked me to sit down. As he explained the situation, I noticed something deeper. He wasn't just facing an external problem. He was facing his own downfall, a downfall that had been building for years, through choices rooted in arrogance, pride, disregard, and lack of character. He was paying the price for everything he had done, and now life placed him right in front of me so he could feel the weight of his own story. I listened calmly. I analyzed every detail, every word, every gesture, and the more he spoke, the clearer my role became. I wasn't in that room as someone smaller, someone who needed him. I was there because I grew, because I fought, because I transformed, because I became exactly the woman who belonged in that place, not by accident, but by right. And it was there, in that moment, in that room filled with divine irony, that I felt the magnitude of the shift. He needed me. The man who once treated me like I was nothing now relied on my intelligence, my strength, my ability, my vision. Not because life wanted to hand me a trophy of revenge, but because it wanted to show me that no, humiliation outweighs the purpose God places inside a woman who rises. If you're listening and you felt this shift in your heart, write in the comments, life turns, because it does. It turns in ways so deep, so just, so perfect, that even those who doubted are forced to see. And that was only the beginning, because after that meeting, things started changing in a way neither he nor I could have predicted. The official follow-up meeting happened a few days later, after I had studied his case, calmly gathered information, analyzed strategies, and observed every detail of the problem destroying his image and threatening his name. I wanted to arrive prepared, not for him, but for myself, because that stage wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about confirming to myself that I no longer lived in that small, limited, wounded version of who I once was. It was about honoring the path I had built, and when I walked into the chosen room, I could feel something important was about to happen. It was a large, quiet room, illuminated by big windows that let the light pour in as if exposing everything hidden. I walked in slowly, steady steps, head held high, and found him sitting there, holding a few papers with trembling hands. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but energetically. The weight of his problem had stripped away the arrogance he once carried. He looked up when he heard my steps, and in that instant, I saw surprise flash in his eyes. Not surprise at seeing me, but surprise at the woman I had become. I approached the table, and the silence between us was so dense it seemed to have its own voice. He tried to act like he was in control, tried to smile politely, tried to adjust his suit like he always did to hide insecurity, but nothing worked, because he knew. He knew he was facing the same woman he humiliated, and he also knew that woman no longer existed. In front of him now stood a complete woman, steady, centered, confident. He sensed it. In the room, in my presence, in my silence. His mask, the one that held his sense of superiority for years, began to crack without me saying a single word. He cleared his throat and greeted me formally, but I noticed his hand trembling. I replied calmly, not with arrogance, but with the serenity of someone who knows exactly who she is. I sat across from him, arranged my notes, and watched him observing every detail, as if trying to understand the woman sitting in front of him. A woman shaped by pain, courage, and discipline. A woman who now had something he had never possessed, truth. When we began to talk, he tried to lead the conversation, but quickly realized he couldn't. I had control of the situation. I had knowledge, preparation, balance. I asked precise questions, presented possible solutions, pointed out mistakes no one had ever dared to tell him. And every time I spoke, I watched him sink a little deeper into his chair, not out of fear, but recognition, as if every word I said dismantled the inflated image he had of himself. It was a silent but powerful scene. He, a man used to commanding, now had no choice but to listen to me, and there was nothing he could do to change that. At one point, he leaned forward slightly and asked, in a voice softer than any I had ever heard from him, how I had learned all of that. He tried to sound professional, but I could see the truth beneath the question. He wanted to know who I had become. He wanted to understand where I found the strength he once tried to strip away. He wanted to know how a woman he once considered insignificant now stood in command of a situation he couldn't control alone. I took a deep breath before answering. I didn't give long explanations, didn't tell my story, didn't talk about the pain I went through or the transformation I lived. I simply continued explaining what needed to be done, because in that moment, my strength wasn't in my words. It was in my posture, in my work, in my presence. And he felt it. He felt he was sitting in front of someone who didn't need to justify herself, someone who didn't need to prove anything. Life was already doing that for me. Little by little, his expression started to change. At first, there was nervousness, then realization, then something that looked a lot like regret. It was as if he were seeing, for the very first time, the gravity of what he had done years ago. That meeting wasn't just professional. It was moral. It was emotional. It was spiritual. It was life, showing him, gently and firmly at the same time, the weight of the choices he had made. And with each moment, I could see more clearly the slow collapse of the mask he had worn for so long. At one point, when I was explaining a crucial part of the plan that would solve a portion of his problem, I realized he wasn't listening to my words anymore. He was looking directly at me, not with arrogance, not with superiority, but with something very close to reverence. He finally understood he wasn't just sitting in front of a professional. He was sitting in front of the woman he once tried to diminish, and who grew anyway. He was facing the strength he never recognized. He was facing the destiny he never imagined. His silence in that moment said more than any sentence could. It was a silence full of recognition, full of shame, full of surprise. He had to look away, because sometimes the weight of truth hurts more than humiliation itself. And I didn't feel pleasure in that. I didn't feel victory. I simply felt that life was doing its job. Emotional justice doesn't need shouting. It happens in the subtleties. As I continued explaining the plan, I noticed he was restless, tapping his fingers on the table, breathing unevenly, adjusting his suit unnecessarily. He was nervous, not because of the problem, but because of me, because it was impossible for him to ignore the woman I had become. He was being forced to face the truth he had avoided for years, the truth that the day he laughed at me, he had no idea who I was. He never knew me. And now he had to accept that underestimating someone can be the most expensive mistake a person makes in life. If you've ever experienced that moment when someone finally recognizes what you always knew you were, write in the comments, "Now he sees," because that recognition doesn't come from them. It comes from your evolution. With every word I spoke, he seemed to shrink a little, not in size, but in posture. I could see the weight of shame on his shoulders, the effort to hold on to some dignity, the discomfort of being face to face with his own broken arrogance. And still, he stayed there, listening to everything, because he needed me, and because there was no room left for pretenses. When the meeting ended, something fundamental had happened between us, even without being spoken. He knew I was indispensable in that situation, and more importantly, he knew that even though I was indispensable, I wouldn't treat him the way he treated me, because my greatness didn't depend on making anyone smaller. I rose from my chair calmly and gathered my papers. He followed me with his eyes, apparently still trying to understand how life had turned in such a profound way. As I approached the door, he called me by my name, and when I turned to look at him, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Genuine remorse. Not remorse for the mess he was in, but remorse for who he had been with me that day. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but didn't, because there were no words that could fix what he did, no apology that could fit inside that room, and he knew it. I simply nodded and left, because that moment didn't need words. The silence had already said everything that needed to be said. When I walked out of that room after the encounter, my body felt light, but my soul was wrapped in a deep silence. Not the silence of avoiding pain, but the silence of finally understanding the meaning of my own journey. Life hadn't brought me there by accident. Everything, absolutely everything, had a purpose hidden beneath it, like invisible threads that only make sense when you look back. As I walked down the hallway, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. A peace that didn't come from victory or pride or revenge. It came from understanding my worth, understanding the power that exists in dignity, understanding how strong a woman becomes when she chooses to remain whole even after being broken. I never needed to humiliate anyone to feel strong, never needed to tear anyone down to feel seen, never needed to use someone else's pain as a shield for my own. Quite the opposite. The real strength inside me always came from my ability to rise without stepping on anyone. And in that meeting, looking into that man's eyes and seeing the shame he tried to hide, I realized that my posture spoke louder than any words ever could. Life taught me that dignity is one of the greatest riches a person can possess. You can't buy it, you can't inherit it, you can't fake it. It's built, brick by brick, scar by scar. Sleepless nights, difficult mornings, swallowed fears, quiet tears. Every part of the journey shapes this richness no one can steal. And that became even clearer when I realized that even though I had the chance to return the humiliation he caused me, my heart didn't want to, my spirit didn't want to, my soul didn't want to. Because my victory was never in making him small. My victory was in becoming great. I learned that divine justice doesn't need an audience, doesn't need explanation, doesn't need haste. It moves at the right time, in the right way, at the right pace. Sometimes it takes longer because you need to grow first. You need to be ready to receive what's yours without losing yourself along the way. I needed time to understand that. I needed to mature. I needed to know myself. I needed to find myself. And today, I understand that every pain I lived was refinement, refining my strength, my faith, my awareness, my identity. The power I have today didn't come from money or influence or the opportunities that came my way. It came from my endurance. It came from the moments I had to hold my own hand, from the times I had to take a deep breath just to keep going, from the silence I turned into prayer, from the respect I learned to have for myself after a lifetime of placing myself last. And when a woman discovers her own power, no one can take that from her. My faith was also my guide, not a loud, showy faith full of memorized phrases, but an intimate, quiet faith built through practice, through daily life, through the days that felt impossible. I talked to God like you talk to an old friend. I told him about my pain, my fears, my doubts. I also told him about my small victories, the ones only he saw. And it was this faith that kept me strong on the day of humiliation. It was this faith that pushed me through my awakening. It was this faith that supported me through my ascent. And it was this same faith that guided me in the reunion, when I had to remind myself that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's spiritual maturity. When I think about everything I lived, I realize that every detail mattered. If that man had treated me well that day, maybe I would never have awakened. Maybe I would have kept accepting far less than I deserved. Maybe I would never have understood the woman I could become. Sometimes life uses exactly what hurts the most to put us on the path that truly belongs to us. And when I understood that, I felt a deep gratitude, not directed at him, but at the process, at the journey, at the transformation. I don't carry anger. I don't carry resentment. What I carry is awareness. Awareness of my worth. awareness of my strength, awareness of my purpose, and no one can take that from me, because it's rooted in my story, a story that didn't begin with humiliation, but long before, a story made of quiet courage, invisible battles, faith that survived dark nights. And this story continues. It continues in me. It continues in every step I take. It continues in every person listening now who recognizes themselves in my words. Life didn't give me back what he took from me. Life gave me something bigger. It gave me back myself. It gave back the woman I had always been but couldn't see. It gave back my voice. It gave back my presence. It gave back my place. And today, when I remember that laugh, it no longer hurts. It only confirms that no one, absolutely no one, has the power to decide who you can become. Some people laugh because they can't see who you are, but God laughs last when He reveals who you've always been. And if you felt that truth deep inside, write in the comments, "I know who I am." That phrase carries enormous power. It affirms your identity, reinforces your dignity, and strengthens the place you deserve to hold in this world. And now that this story has reached its deepest moment, I want to invite you to continue in the universe of the Matriarch Secrets. The video appearing on your screen right now brings another story of strength, wisdom, and revelation. A different story, but filled with the same truth that transforms, heals, and teaches. Allow yourself to hear what comes next. Sometimes the story you need the most isn't the one you just heard, but the one waiting for you in the next video.